hooked up electronically? Online? Good. Okay, we're live. You everybody, I'm going to call the meeting in order of Beaumont City Council Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, November 15th at 5 p.m. I'm going to acknowledge our land acknowledgement to begin our meeting as we always do. We are pleased to be here today on traditional territories of Treaty 6 and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 4. We acknowledge all those who share a deep connection with this land. The City of Beaumont respects the histories, languages, and cultures of all of Canada's First Peoples, whether they be a First Nation, Métis, or Inuit descent, and appreciates that their presence continues to enrich Canada's vibrant communities. As we gather here in these traditional territories, we acknowledge that we are all treaty people and have ongoing responsibility to protect and honor all of life. Next on our agenda to adopt the agenda. Ms. Bujaya, administration, any changes to the agenda this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do have some changes. I'm just going to pull that up. So administration will be asking for 2 adjustments to the agenda. We are asking to add a new item, attachment 4, traffic safety bylaw and automated traffic enforcement presentation, to item 5.d. That's of course the traffic safety bylaw and automated traffic enforcement report. And we are also asking to delete and replace attachment 7, Beaumont Land Use Bylaw Council presentation, with an updated presentation. The changes to the presentation are editorial and not substantive.
Okay, thank you. Member Council willing to move the adoption of the agenda as amended? Councillor Miller? Oh, there we go.
Sure, I move that the November 15th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting agenda be adopted as presented. Is that okay? Okay.
Awesome. Discussion on the motion. And I know we have 3 councils this evening joining us remotely. And I do appreciate Councillor Muckhoff-Swain, Councillor Barnhart, and Councillor McCook joining us remotely. And I will make sure I endeavor to ask you individually for your votes on each motion as we go on this evening. So with that, I'll ask council to vote on the adopted agenda. Councillor Muckhoff-Swain, how do you vote?
In favor.
Thank you. Councillor Barnhart?
In favor.
Thank you. Councillor McCook?
In favor.
Thank you. That carries unanimously. Thank you, council. Ms. Bujay, I need to call members of council committee members this evening, or can I call them councillors because we're in a committee of the whole? I can.
They are always councillors, so councillors is always appropriate. Committee members also appropriate. It's a dealer's choice.
Okay. I might call you guys one of the 2 tonight, so we'll roll, see how it goes. All right. Next on the agenda is adoption of the minutes of the previous committee of the whole from October 18th, 2022. Is there a member of council willing to move the adoption of the minutes from the previous committee of the whole? Councillor Tessier.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that the October 18th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes be adopted as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, council, I'll ask you to vote accordingly to the motion. Councillor Muckhoff-Swain?
In favor.
Councillor Barnhart?
In favor.
Councillor McCook?
In favor.
Thank you. That carries unanimously. Thank you, council. Before we begin our next part of our agenda, I do know some of our council members and some members of the public are sporting their November mustaches. They're off to a pretty lean start, some of them. Just saying, I'm off to a very lean start because I can't stand the itch. So I appreciate you're doing that for charity. It's a great thing you guys are doing for that. So much appreciated. Open forum. Ms. Bujay, any open forum this evening?
Mr. Mayor, we've not received any registrations for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Proceed on to 5A. We have 4 sets of presentations this evening. We have a very heavy agenda. So I'm going to ask that we begin immediately with 5A, Land Use Bylaw Zoning Blueprint Report. Who will be presenting from administration, please? Ms. Raymond, you have the floor.
Greetings, Mayor, members of council, and the public. Here with me tonight is our new manager of development services over here, just Grace. Sean Hipkiss, who comes to us from the private sector with over 14 years of experience in lands, permitting, and planning disciplines. We have Yasmin Sharp, who is our senior development planner. And then we have our consultant team from Intelligent Futures, John Lewis and Alistair Wycliffe Jones. So we'll be taking turns giving this presentation here. I'll start with the beginning. So yes, they'll come up to the table.
When you speak, I'll put the mic on. And they're very directional, so please speak right into it. If you could mean to back and forth between you, but they're very, very directional. So please be mindful. Ms. Raymond, please.
Thank you, Mayor. At the January 25th, 2022 council meeting, a motion was passed which directed administration to prepare a report on the feasibility and impacts of increasing parking requirements in residential districts, decreasing the number of permitted additional dwelling units, and an overview of current standards for home-based businesses. Administration has worked with Intelligent Futures to examine the questions related to parking requirements and additional dwelling units, as well as to undertake some other engagement in alignment with the 2021 land use bylaw monitoring programs, such as zero lot lines and signage. The city has comprehensive policy work focuses on unlocking future opportunities for development and ensuring that our regulations are capable of building communities for everyone. Our zoning blueprint, Beaumont's land use bylaw, supports the development of a healthy, resilient, welcoming, and economically sustainable community. It is also the primary tool that implements the city's municipal development plan, Our Complete Community, as well as other master plans and design guidelines. It is the instrument through which the use and development of all land in the municipality is regulated. The land use bylaw establishes the uses that may be carried out on each parcel of land and the standards that must be followed when using or constructing on the land. This document helps foster an environment of predictability and collaboration. The What We Learned report in Attachment 1 summarizes the methods and outcomes of our engagement and research. It also includes information which are outside the scope of this motion, but as mentioned, were identified as emerging issues in the 2022 Land Use Bylaw Monitoring Report. I will now turn it over to John and Alistair to continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Raymond. Good evening, good afternoon, members of council. Glad to be with you. So our work related to these items covered three areas of exploration. The first being community engagement and policy alignment, and then case studies and related considerations. Next slide, please. So on the community engagement front, as you can see, there was a healthy amount of interest from the community on the issue. The majority of feedback received was on the online survey. There were also 4 focus groups that took place, 2 with residents, 1 with developers and builders, and 1 with city staff to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the issues, especially related to additional dwelling units and parking. There's for the experiences of folks that had undergone sign applications to understand their experience. Next slide, please. The policy alignment focused on the municipal development plan to understand how the potential changes could align or would align with the MDP. Next slide. And then a variety of case studies were looked at across a wide geography, looking at different types of communities, but the critical piece is relatively recently addressed some of the challenges or issues that we are speaking to.
Sorry, some of the councillors online are saying it's a bit glitchy, the sound. Can we just, maybe pull your microphone just a little closer?
Sure.
Actually, just pull it closer to you would be helpful.
They're not seeing the slide, so we just need a moment here.
Okay,
We lost our internet connection for a second there and it booted us out.
you're good, Steve? Okay, that's what I was assuming. Thanks. Thanks, guys. Just give us a second. It sounds not bad in here, but sometimes on hold at home is not quite as clear as we'd like it to be. So get it, like maybe those TV commercials, like the mics right here, get it really close. That wouldn't hurt. You voice a commercial maybe later too, if you. Give us a second. We're good? Okay, please continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, so the case studies reviewed, as I was just saying, the key factor is that these communities have relatively recently looked at some of the key issues that are part of this exploration. Next slide, please. So the parking exploration, so the direction from council to understand the feasibility and impacts of adding additional parking restrictions for business use and additional dwelling units in current residential zones. Next slide. So as you can see, we've pulled a few highlights from the engagement and the feedback that we received. So when it comes to the question of do folks that responded feel that there's adequate parking being provided in residential neighborhoods related to dwelling units, 63% of the respondents disagreed with that. When we asked about parking requirements for home-based businesses in residential neighborhoods, 45% disagreed with that. 16% were neutral. This was the highest amount of neutrality in the responses on that. So as you can see, there's definite concern in the community amongst the folks we heard from related to issues of parking in residential neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So policy alignment, we looked, as I mentioned, at the MDP, looking at the most relevant policies and objectives. As you can see from the analysis here, when we looked at the potential changes as it relates to parking, it was determined that those changes would either be neutral, have no discernible direction related to the direction of the MDP, or don't align. Should note that the alignment question was really one of direction, not necessarily order of magnitude, and looked at these issues in isolation, understanding that any one of the objectives or policies, there's a suite of options and actions that the municipality can take. Next slide, please. When it comes to the case studies and reviewing what's happening in other communities, removing parking restrictions is a bit of a trend that's happening in communities. They're taking those actions. One of those actions would be switching from requiring parking minimums to parking maximums. There's a lot of rationale and thinking behind that, some of which are the reduction of GHG emissions, helping with housing affordability. So for every parking pad or parking structure that cost isn't incurred by a developer or builder, that's a cost that isn't transferred to residents. And in addition, where there's less regulatory requirements, there's seen as reduced administrative demands on municipal governments related to that. As we think about parking and the tools available to municipalities, the land use bylaw is one tool in the proverbial toolkit, but there are others as well to consider. Next slide, please. Related to additional dwelling units, so the task was understanding the feasibility and impacts of limiting the number of dwelling units per parcel to a maximum of 2 suites for single family homes where there's no detached garage, and a maximum of 3 suites for single family homes where a detached garage is included. Next slide, please. So the feedback received here, a few of the highlights that we want to point out. When we asked, do you think that these kinds of dwelling units provide benefit or help create a more livable city? 55% of the respondents disagreed with that, in that these choices provide benefit to the community. When asked about would folks that responded like to provide or are considering adding dwelling units to their own properties, 2/3 of the folks weren't interested in taking that option. And then lastly, the question if these folks who responded or their family members would be interested in renting one of these types of facilities in the future, the response was 60% disagreed with that. So again, similarly, you can see that there's a variety of feedback, but certainly there's concern as it relates to additional dwelling units from the respondents we heard from. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll keep going. So the policy alignment, similar to the parking, in reviewing the pertinent policies, it landed as either neutral or not aligning with the direction of the municipal development plan. And in this one particular, with the ones that don't align, with the density targets, with accommodating more residents, really seen as if there are fewer options for additional dwelling units, it's fewer options to get to those future directions. Next slide, please. So in the case studies and the related considerations, the additional dwelling units often, affordable housing is a challenge across the country. Affordable housing often quickly moves to a discussion of non-market housing, government's intervention in the housing market. And so one thing that's come up is that additional dwelling units provide a market solution by providing these different types of units to affordability in a community. Perhaps more pertinent now in a time of raising interest rates than other times in recent memory, the idea that these additional dwelling units can provide additional income for homeowners is something that was brought up. And then lastly, I think it's important to recognize that observe that many municipalities are taking a more data-informed approach to additional dwelling units by ensuring that they have databases, understanding the number and location so they can monitor over time and really incorporate a strong data set into the decision-making process. Next slide. And I'll hand it over to Ms. Sharp to talk about home-based businesses.
So the final element of the motion is an overview of home-based businesses, including their standards and distinction between minor and major. So a minor home-based business is a permitted use, meaning that if your business fits within the defined scope, you can expect to have a development permit and there is no appeal period associated with it. So the definition includes the business use of a dwelling unit by the resident. There's no use of an accessory building. There's no outdoor use associated with it. There's no client visits. There's no signage either. So some examples might be office and telephone associated with businesses that are operating off-site, for example, a cleaner, a dispatcher, or a real estate agent. Another example is preparation of food, goods, drinks that are delivered to clients off-site. And finally, virtual service providers like therapists, consultants, graphic designers. So on the other hand, major home-based business, that's a discretionary use, meaning that to the discretion of the development authority, the application may be refused, it may be approved, it may be approved with conditions. And there is a 21-day appeal period where adjacent landowners that are deemed affected by the development officer are provided a letter notifying of their ability to appeal if they wish to do so. Again, the definition is a business use of a dwelling unit by the residents. It may include the use of the accessory building or limited outdoor activities that are deemed to not cause a nuisance. And a large part of that is it cannot still affect the residential character of the property. So examples are listed on the slide there. There's massage therapist, fitness trainer, music lessons, day homes, etc. So the use standards that are listed there, those are the ones that are in clients per day. Again, at the discretion of the development authority, that can be reduced. You are permitted one non-illuminated sign, one parking stall is required per business. It may include outdoor activities, for example, in the case of a day home, and there's no more than 2 employees at one time. So above and beyond that, again, the development authority has the ability to look at the circumstances of the application and the context and add additional conditions to mitigate some of the perceived impacts to surrounding areas. So some common conditions that are often found on home-based business majors is limiting the hours of operation, limiting the number of clients at any given time, and requiring staggering visits. So attachment 3 illustrates the location of all home-based business majors in the city that have active business licenses. In addition, because the engagement process highlighted that participants were particularly concerned about the concentration of uses, attachment 4, 5, and 6 provide a more focused look at the concentration of additional dwelling units and home-based business majors in Place Chaleur's, Forest Heights, Triumph, and Dansereau neighborhoods. Alternatives and next steps. So thus far, the presentation has provided a brief summary of the findings from the engagement, policy research, and case studies that are explored in more detail within the report to the committee and the What We Learned report. However, to provide a complete picture of the tools at the municipality's disposal to mitigate these concerns related to parking and additional dwelling units in particular, the final portion of the presentation covers the primary concerns that emerged related to parking supply and by association congestion and safety of users caused by illegal parking or high traffic volumes. And there are limitations to addressing the concerns entirely through regulations in the land use bylaw, most notably that by increasing on-site parking requirements, the municipality does not have the authority to dictate how those parking stalls are used. So some common examples are that tenants may not be permitted to park on site by the landowners. Garages could be used for storage or as a workshop, and rear parking pads can store recreation vehicles. So again, these alternatives are kind of other tools within the municipality's toolkit to address these concerns. First is enforcement through the Traffic Safety Bylaw and Traffic Safety Act. This can address concerns related to parking too close to driveways, intersections, crosswalks, fire hydrants, and other things that are regulated by those bylaws. Increased enforcement can also encourage residents to use on-site parking as their primary choice. Secondly is community design that balances parking supply with developing a walkable and compact city. So through the municipal development plan and other directional plans, there is policy in place, for instance, to reduce the amount of cul-de-sacs due to constraints that it places on parking supply, challenges with snow removal, garbage collection, and reduced walkability. In addition, the land use bylaw requires that a minimum percentage of the integrated neighbor district be developed as rear lane access. Not only does that create a more walkable frontage, but it also provides more opportunities for street parking. Next is continued investment in local and regional transit to reduce the reliance on personal vehicles. And as council is aware, the city has a few initiatives that are being moved forward in that regard. And finally, communication campaigns to inform residents about parking choices. Next slide, please. So as part of this, administration and the consultant identified 3 potential next steps, the first of which would require further direction from council to undertake. But the first is to conduct a parking study to validate whether regulations in the land use bylaw and free market forces are supplying sufficient parking in residential areas. So the engagement process has certainly confirmed that there's a perception of a misalignment between supply and demand. However, if intended, through this parking supply administration can determine whether the best strategy available is to revisit land use bylaw regulations, or if one of the alternatives listed in the previous slide would be a more targeted approach, depending on what the findings were. Next is a review of the community standards bylaw and traffic safety bylaw to ensure that regulation and enforcement practices reflect community priorities regarding parking and noise control. And finally, creating a GIS database to support development officers' decisions around how discretionary uses are concentrated. The database would be developed to include information such as the number and location of additional dwelling units, the location of major home-based businesses, the hours of operation, the number of clients, and the number of on-site parking stalls available. Of course, all of this information will be a lot more readily compiled through electronic permitting in the future. That concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time, and we're open for questions.
Thank you very much. At this time, council is open to questions for the presentation thus far on land use bylaw. And I'll look up to the screen first to see if any of my colleagues on the screen have their hand raised for a question at this point. Councilor McCook, why don't you kick us off, Kat?
Thank you, Mayor. I have quite a few questions. So I don't know if you, what's the best way to tackle this? If we want to go by issue, maybe by parking, then ADUs, then home-based business, or do you just want me to fire away?
Actually, that's a good question. I already thought of that myself. Why don't we start with your first topic, and I'll then ask council if they have a second cap. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Oh, no, sorry. I think it glitched out. I didn't catch the last piece there. I think so. I'll just start with parking, I guess.
Sure.
Okay, so I definitely appreciate this report. It was very thorough and definitely gave us a lot of information, which included various impacts of each decision, which was appreciated. Parking is a big one, and I understand the environmental impact of adding additional parking. But also we aren't quite there with the transit piece. Therefore, I think it's hard to ask our residents to rely on transit when it's not necessarily there. So that's a tough piece on that behalf. I also certainly empathize with residents who stated that they have concerns regarding the home-based businesses too close together in newer neighborhoods with a lot of the smaller lot sizes. And I understand the principle of what we're trying to achieve, but I'm not really sure that it's working out in real life. On page 8 of the agenda, it states that Beaumont shall support innovative parking strategies. Can you expand on what those strategies look like in residential areas?
Who can speak to that? One of our presenters? Yeah. Mic's on. There you go.
Thank you. Should I, sorry, just do I need to respond through somebody?
No, just go right ahead, please. We're fairly informal today.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
So to your point, there are different innovative parking solutions, some of which have been identified, and as well as being identified as objective that objective in the MDP that the City of Beaumont is working towards. I can't off the top of my head list any on the ground in the City of Beaumont, and I will defer to the City of Beaumont staff to supplement my answer here. However, through some of the case studies examined, such as the City of Edmonton, for example, they're moving to, as was mentioned briefly in the presentation, removing parking requirements or parking minimums, which is an innovative strategy, and moving it rather to parking maximums, which just allows more flexibility for landowners to and developers to use how they're creating parking solutions and development slightly different, and creates different development options for what they can build on their lands without having to withhold to those parking minimum standards. With that, I'll maybe defer to Yasmin or City of Beaumont staff if they have anything else to add or supplement.
I would just add that through the land use bylaw, the biggest change that came from the direction of the municipal development plan was really paring down the requirements for parking that were previously expected in previous versions of the land use bylaw. So currently, as you saw in the report, we only require one parking stall per unit over 75 meters squared, rather than every single unit within a parcel. In terms of innovative parking strategies, a lot of them have been more experimented in commercial areas, so more shared parking strategies, or looking at underground parking and things like that.
Explain to me when you said that one parking stall per 75 square meter unit. Can you explain what you meant by that? Is that an increase or decrease in parking? Could you specify?
For sure. Compared to the previous land use bylaw, it's a decrease in requirements. So for example, if you have a basement suite that is only 60 meters squared, you wouldn't need to require an additional parking stall.
On the property, on site.
Yes.
So if you had a single drive, just bear with me for a second. If you had a single driveway at the house, you put a basement suite in, that's only 60 square meters, not 70 as you mentioned. There's no requirement to expand the driveway on the property. That tenant would have to be parking on the street, correct?
Correct.
So can you tell me then the philosophical benefits of doing that, where would not that force more parking on the street that's not there already because the street wasn't there before? if a homeowner puts a suite in, it doesn't require a parking stall, that adds more pressure to parking on the street. So are you saying the trend is going towards less park requirements? Is that the trend in the market, or that's the trend? Doesn't mean you have to do it in Beaumont, but that's the trend that you're identifying in this report?
Yes, and in terms of rationale, there's a few. One is that the builder or developer is always free to add more parking regulations. So the market can dictate providing more than what the land use bylaw requires. So the land use bylaw is setting down that minimum, but again, a landowner can decide to expand their parking provisions on site. Another benefit for providing more parking on the street rather than the lot is that the tenancy structure and the use of a particular home might change over the life cycle of that home. So there may be 3 units available on a single parcel, and at the maximum usage of that site, it requires 3 stalls, let's say. But in the future, if though that use isn't used as intensely, the street parking kind of helps to balance out the changes on an individual parcel, because it's public parking rather than being restricted to a single parcel that only that parcel can use. So it again, helps to balance out the life cycle of rather than requiring parking based on the most intensive use of the life of that parcel. There is public parking available that helps to balance out those changes.
Okay, thank you. Kat, please continue with your questions.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's where we're finding some issues in our community as well. From page 65, it says that one of the comments where if a single family home is allowed to have 4 suites, how can you not have parking issues? So say you have 3 single family homes, in a close proximity to each other that all have multiple suites. I think that's a good point. How do we propose that we deal with this? There's a lot of does not align portions in the report when it comes to the parking requirements with the MDP and stuff. So when people are parked on the street and the street's congested due to inadequate parking within the home or area, and we're talking about reducing the requirements for that, we're not really offering any solutions other than clog up the streets. Do we have other solutions?
Go ahead, please. Yeah. Thanks.
I think it absolutely is a question of sequencing and timing that makes it the challenge. The decisions that are made in a particular development or subdivision now, if the transit options, the mobile active mobility options are less than they may be in the future, it really is just a difficult challenge. One of the key recommendations in terms of the next steps, just add I think the last part of the information piece of the puzzle is the parking study recommendation and really ground truthing. Often I've had conversations with colleagues about parking in some ways, similar to how folks in the community see safety. So there might be a perception that safety is going down, but crime stats might show something different. So not to discount, there's an absolute concern we've observed from what we heard. So to get backs are across the community, I think is worth considering, but it really is a timing challenge when it comes to these long-term MDP type objectives.
So to piggyback on Councilman Cook's question, then you mentioned that the parking study will provide some information. What exactly will the parking study provide us with information should council decide to take one of those next steps? Can you give us kind of a Reader's Digest version of what that will actually tell us?
For sure. So just briefly, and then I'll pass it over to Ms. Sharp. The parking studies will typically tell you based on observed behavior if you are over or under parked. And so Ms. Sharp can expand on that perhaps.
I think Ms. Raymond, is your microphone? Oh, Ms. Sharp. Go ahead, please.
I can cite an example of a parking study that the city of Beaumont has already done for Centreville. This was done as part of the Centreville Area Redevelopment Plan. And for example, one of the findings was that there is sufficient parking within Centreville, but the challenges lie with wayfinding and understanding where that parking is. So as John was referring to, it looks at observed behavior to see if there's enough, how's it being used at different times of day, so that you can make decisions on whether we want to regulate based on peak absolute usage. So for example, a shopping mall during Christmas time, is that the philosophy? Or is the philosophy to regulate based on average use, things like that? Or another example of peak use is, a party at your house. Another note that I'll just add as well is we did do a sample review of additional dwelling unit applications that were approved in 2022. There was 21 permits that have been approved this year, and so far all of them have had a oversupply of the parking requirements. So they range from 3 to 6 stalls were provided on site, even though the requirement ranges between 1 and 2 for those particular instances. So again, the parking study would match whether how many stalls are being provided right now versus, what the regulations are and what the gap is between those two things.
Okay. Councilor McCook, any further questions on parking? If you do keep going, we'll ask the council to jump in.
Just one more, I think, just based on that, when you say that the ADUs that were approved and additional parking, they had additional parking than what was required, does that include the garage as considered as parking?
Ms. Sharp? Sorry, I think you're, okay, hang on. Let me try that again. There you go.
Yes, it does include the garage as part of the parking.
And I think that's just where it's difficult when it comes to ADUs, because if you have 2 people parking in the garage and then 2 people parking on a driveway, how do you schedule that when you have different homes and different schedules and stuff? So while I understand that the garage would be considered parking, I think in reality, when you have multiple units in one place, it doesn't really work out to actual parking. That's just my comment, but and I understand that more parking equals less walkable communities, and our goal is really to work towards a more walkable community. Just the fact is we're not there right now. Our services are concentrated in the north and the south, and we don't really have much in the east and the west. So as more of these places come up, I think we need to look at what our parking alternatives are. But that's all for me on parking right now, Mayor. Thank you. I do have other questions on other ones, but I will let other councillors go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I think we're going to then ask other councillors for questions that we have regarding the parking part of the presentation before we move on to other topics. Anybody else got questions on parking? Councillor Van Newkirk, Steve, followed by Councillor Tessier, and I see no one else on screen. So Steve, you go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think Councillor McCook did a good job kicking us off on parking for sure. Item number 4 in the agenda tonight is also the traffic angle, and there's a bunch on parking in there as well. What I would highlight in that is there are specific measurements required. Only park so close to this, so far from that, 1.5 meter from a driveway, X number of meters from a corner, X number of meters from a hydrant and stuff. And what I would say in Beaumont right now is that, a complaint-based municipal enforcement system doesn't have all of those places in Beaumont where people are parking where they shouldn't be being acted upon. So ultimate activity to act on the parking that is too close to driveways, too close to hydrants, too close to corners. I think that the parking issues that we're seeing in our community would even be amplified more. And this is all driven by the desire to achieve regional density targets, right? You've got smaller lots. You're jamming more people onto smaller lots. People have cars, they need places to park them, right? So that's the genesis of all this. So, I don't think that any of us are head in the sand on that. And it's probably not all, it's probably not also a problem that's confined to Beaumont. When I look at the, the case studies and stuff that you guys have done or looked through and whatnot. So, so that leads me to a question for the presenters. Has there been any of the case studies that you've looked at that have taken and ramped up enforcement on parking to make sure that people are parking in the right places and only the places they should? Have you seen any of that, and what was the outcome of that? To bigger picture, do you have anything to offer on that?
Not particularly, at least on the enforcement surrounding where exactly, rather just generally enforcement had been seen as a tool among others, as a way to help regulate and manage parking issues. But to kind of the specifics that you were talking to there about kind of the constraints, nothing came clearly across to answer that.
Yeah, I don't see ourselves careening towards a solution in parking when we're making smaller lots that have hydrants, trees, crosswalks, and more people living on those smaller lots. I don't see us careening towards a solution around parking for residents. So, I'll leave it at a comment for there. I don't know if there's something that I'm missing here, but I just don't see us getting to a spot when we're wanting more people to live in smaller places and saying we can't park here, you can't park there, you can't park there, and we're still not enforcing because I think people are putting up with bad parking in the neighborhoods. We're still not enforcing. So imagine if we enforce that, then where would we be? Hopefully you would have seen 1,000 respondents, with concerns around parking, right? And and a big thanks to everyone that participated in the survey. I think the engagement from my side, the engagement looked good, and I'll conclude with a question just around those engagement numbers. What would your commentary be on the volume of participation that you got in the what we heard segment? Where are we on the Canadian Tire good, better, best measure of success here?
Well, certainly it was higher than the first round of engagement we did for the environmental master plan a while ago.
There you go. Yeah.
I think it was, like I said, a healthy amount of feedback. I think this is the kind of issue that will gives voice to folks that have existing concerns, and I think that really showed in a really good way, that we can understand that there's some needs in the community that just aren't feel like they've been met. So I'd say the good, better, best. I'd say good to better, but healthy would be a word I would use, just in terms of the type of issue. It's quite specific, which sometimes people don't want to respond to, but in terms of the amount of folks that we heard from in different parts of the community, I think it was pretty healthy.
Yeah, and the maps were helpful as well, to who replied from where, right? Like kind of the heat maps there. So yeah, I've got a bunch more questions, Mayor, but I'll pause there for now, and we'll let someone else go on the parking. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Just one quick question before I go to Councillor Tessier. How many people responded roughly? I remember seeing a number, I can't remember what off the top of my head. How many approximate respondents did we have in the survey? Was it 550? I saw the number somewhere. I thought it was in the 500 range. Yeah. So let's just say 550, argument's sake, rather than trying to find it. Good enough. Thank you. Councillor Tessier, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for the presentation. And I agree with the other councillors and kind of where we're going here, but parking's a big one. I think obviously with the smaller lots and the smaller kind of roads and smaller front lawns, and we're ending up parking on the street a lot more. We're just starting to see those problems happen, right? The older parking, I think over the next 5 years, if we continue down this path, we're going to be in a little bit of a hurting situation for parking. And we really want people not to park on the street, especially in the winter. We're having a tough time plowing our roads in an efficient manner. That's something that worries me. In parking for the major businesses, so we allow up to 10 clients per day. Is that correct? So if I own a gym, I can only have 10 clients in a whole day?
Ms. Sharp?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
the use standard within the land use bylaw.
Okay, so again, we're complaint based. If you're running more clients in a day, what, I didn't look up the fines, but what does that result in?
So if we had a complaint from a neighbor, in that case, we would send a letter first. So we don't escalate to a fine in the beginning, and we remind that you must stay within your conditions, and these are the conditions as they've been outlined. If we have further evidence that those are not being met, then at that point we can escalate to a stop order, which means that you have to stop operating your business until you bring your conditions back into scope. We can revoke the license, the permit, if it continues to be an issue, or we can start applying fines, which begin, I think, for not following conditions, $500. Again, we rarely start at that step.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And you know, the major businesses, to me, there's a little bit of a difference between maybe, you know, a salon or a gym where 5 or 6 people are coming at a time. And to me, I'd be surprised if only 10 clients per day are going to the gym. But I think parking for major home businesses is something we need to do a better job on increasing and under ADUs. And obviously we'll get to that point, but parking stall for a major business, that just doesn't seem sufficient, right? On the newer areas and the newer streets. And again, I think those problems are just beginning. It's just going to get worse. And I think Councillor McCook nailed it on the head with transit. You know, I could see the city of Edmonton and bigger urban cities having that walkable neighborhood to where they need to get to. Maybe we'll get there with an on-demand system at some point, but parking's a big one, and I find it tough on you know, how much to restrict and how much not to restrict. But obviously we're leaving it a bit open right now, and we're seeing those problems from our residents on the streets. So really looking forward to where we get on that point. But that's my comments for now, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Tessier. So just to clarify, so with a major business, it says 1 parking stall. So my interpretation of that is the parking stall should be on the property, right? So for example, a single family dwelling, double garage or double driveway in front of the house, like most tend to have a double driveway, and the person opens a gym in their basement. The clients are supposed to park on the house, right? So if the owner of the house, who is also the gym owner, decides to use their garage for something else and to parks both vehicles they own on the driveway, their clients are forced then to park on the street, which they're not supposed to based on their usage. Is that correct? Please.
Yes, that is correct. However, I will add that the common practice for our development officers is on the site plan to identify what stall is considered business parking, so that it's defined in saying, from our perspective, this is the stall that's reserved for business use.
Right, I understand that. Just to clarify, because I've had a few residents phone me saying, hey, this neighbor of mine, great person, they run a home business. I don't have a problem with that, but their clients are parking on the street, not on their driveway where they're supposed to. And I think they're correct, obviously, by the sounds of what my understanding was and what you're saying again this evening. So my understanding was correct. They're supposed to park on the driveway, and it is in either side of the driveway, whichever is designated at. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that, Councillor Tessier. Any further questions from councillors on the parking section? Councillor Montcalf-Swain and Councillor Barnhart, are you any question? I really can't. You look really small on the screen today, so I don't know if you've got a hand up or not. So I'm not seeing any hands up. So I'm assuming you're okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Pardon me,
Ms.
but
Majer?
to chime in on that last question and offer a little more perspective on that.
Sure, Ms. Raymond.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to add one thing about that is that if people are having challenges with parking and their neighbors and whatnot, I mean, with that home-based business especially, you know, we would be able to undertake, you know, that warning letter or being able to go out and double check and remind people. So if those neighbors are having problems, they can contact the city, and then we can do something about these things. I just want to note a couple of things. One is that we are trying to reduce the amount of paved and impermeable surface we have. So the more pavement we add, the more environmental and stormwater and runoff concerns we're starting to create. We're also now negatively affecting housing affordability as we start to bump out housing for parking stalls and whatnot. You mentioned density with our need to have more narrow lots, and that is also where the market is at too in terms of affordability. Interest rates are high, stress test, all that stuff for new people. We are decreasing the affordability and eroding that. One of the best strengths the Edmonton region does have is our housing affordability. So that is something we need to consider. And there is a balance between that as you're supplying that parking to not do that because it ends up disproportionately affecting lower income people. So just wanted to say that as it relates to why some of these parking restrictions are a bit looser.
That helps. Thank you, Ms. Raymond. Appreciate that. Any further questions on the parking portion of our presentation this evening on land use bylaw? Seeing none, I'll go back to Kat. You had a couple of questions you said beyond parking. So let's go start back with you, Kat, to Catherine for your questions regarding other issues in parking. Please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'll move to the ADU piece. Well, I completely agree. And as to Ms. Raymond, that secondary suites offer affordability options for home ownership. And I don't know that anyone on council here is against any of that, especially with the state of how things are. We definitely need to offer that. However, I think we just clearly need a better way or more responsible way of managing how this is happening. To Councillor Van Nieuwkerk's point, you know, even with garbage cans when it comes to parking and spacing, and if you have 4 suites in one home or 3 suites in one home, you know, all these garbage cans are there. How do we space them out? How do we park and move and cars with garbages out? It just, I think, becomes complicated. But there's a lot of comments on how this misaligns with the MDP and how we have to build up density, and that is a requirement of ours. I think part of the disconnect here is that a lot of people move to Beaumont for the space and to not live in high density areas. So my question is, how are we balancing the growth and density targets with ensuring that our current residents get to enjoy the community, the one that they bought into because of how it was?
Great question, Kat. Any takers from administration on that one? That's a good one. Ms. Sharp or our presenters? Ms. Raymond? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to Councillor McCook. So just to clarify, you're saying people that have moved to Beaumont for the larger lots in the way that traditional kind of family neighborhood, right? Mm-hmm. I think as a region that is starting to disappear. There's lots of regulations and stuff like that about increasing density. People are trying to have maybe smaller lots in order to be able to, say, afford a larger house or to do different things like that. Balancing more age-friendly, allowing for more diversity of housing types within a neighborhood that isn't just a predominantly single family, because that means that really only a certain demographic then ends up living there. And so I think that that's also market driven to have that at all ages as well. You know, you want to have that ability for your grandparents to be able to live close to those grandchildren, to help take care of them and for them to also help you. Like, it's a whole balance. But I just don't know if that way of life is going to continue moving forward into the future. So that one's a hard one. It's very subjective.
True enough. I think appreciate the answer. I do know my understanding that Stony Plain has no 0 lot lines developments in their city. They choose no 0 lot lines. So they seem to find a way to achieve density targets and affordability in Stony Plain, where we have some 0 lot line areas in our city, as is Edmonton, Spruce Grove, Sherwood Park. Other areas have that, but they don't have in Stony Plains. Just an observation to your comment about affordability. I get that, but some municipalities aren't going the 0 lot line route, which does create larger lots, more parking spaces on driveways and so on. So there's 2 sides to every coin. I do appreciate the comment on that. So Councillor McCook, do you have another comment to bring forward?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I understand that affordability is something that we need to look at. And along those lines as well, I think, especially when we talk about aging in place and having our grandparents and stuff, I think one thing we've heard continuously from our community is that, especially from, I think, some people who would be like grandparents and stuff like that, they would like smaller bungalow type lots and options, and we don't have those. And it seems like developers aren't really developing those because we are creating the smaller lots, which are creating taller, skinnier homes. So I think if we're going to talk about aging in place and stuff like that, then we also need to look at really pushing the developers and everything to also then build homes like smaller bungalows. But that's, I think, kind of a different point. So it states that limiting ADUs does not align with the MDP. So I don't think we want to eliminate them, but maybe potentially limit them. And when we talk about if changes are made, some of the current suites, I think it was on page 12, would be considered legal non-conforming. What would be the impact on the landowner's rights in regards to that change?
Sorry, before you answer quick, Kat, which page 12 are you referring to, the presentation or
The agenda.
Okay, thank you. Member of administration willing to respond to that latest question? Oh, sorry, Ms. Sharp, go ahead.
Thank you. Essentially, being legal non-conforming means that you cannot make significant changes to the structure of the use that's legal non-conforming. So you wouldn't be able to expand it, for example, if it operating for 6 months at a time and the city was aware of that, then you would lose the status of that use. And in a very specific example, if your home burns down and the repair requires more than 75%, you wouldn't be able to include that use in the rebuild. Those are some examples.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. So when we talked about housing options and stuff like that, how do we balance what's in the MDP with the land use bylaw when it comes to what developers are providing?
Ms. Raymond.
Through the mayor to Councillor McCook, developers are providing more in line with what market trends are and what people are paying for, I suppose, in alignment with the MDP. So that would be that higher level direction that implements our density targets through the Edmonton metropolitan region, and then talks about broadly what we want to be as our community, our aspirations as we grow. So then the land use bylaw would then take that, and then it creates the very specific regulations that would dictate the size of those parcels and whatnot, and provides a broad range. So, I mean, just because this is the minimum doesn't mean that that's the maximum. It's just what's being built. I don't have the numbers in front of us, but I'm not entirely sure that we've had a significant departure in our lot sizes probably over the past, since the MDP was in creation and development. We have less residential districts than we had before, but I think that it provides more flexibility for people. So it's just however they're choosing. And right now it's what the market is demanding. I think if we were to start to dictate higher, larger lot sizes, that sort of thing, we might find ourselves not a community of choice for developers. And that would be okay. But I mean, that would just be the market that we have chosen to put ourselves into. So that would be the way that we would go. If council, had that desire to only have lot sizes of this much, then we would be making that up through higher density development. We'd have to build more apartments. We would have to do more medium density development versus more of these more gentle types of density through the additional dwelling units or through the smaller single family homes. So it would just be a different type. So you might have more concentration of those, which might not fit with what you're thinking either. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think you made a good point that
Thank you, Ms. Raymond.
if we make the shift from potentially multiple ADUs in one or 0 lot lines, then we do have to look at other density type options. So it is also really understanding what the community wants and what direction we can go with that. Thank you, Mayor. I will leave it at that for the ADUs and leave it to other councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, councilors. We are on the topic of ADUs, and I have Councilor Miller, followed by Councilor Tesse, followed by Councilor Newkirk, and I'm pretty sure a couple of people on the screen will be coming in after that too. So, Councilor Miller, Ashley, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. This is really good conversation. I'm kind of sitting back and hearing a lot of concerns, and up until Ms. Raymond spoke, I kept thinking to myself, what is the potential solutions here to what we currently are dealing with, which is the ADUs, and I sort of heard, which I think she said was the potential other options or alternate options of apartments, different types of structures. I'm not going to dive into my personal opinion on these issues right now because we're just specifically here to look at this as information. But I do appreciate you advising of those other options, because I think it's easy to talk about the parking, but I am interested to hear, overall. One thing that I will say that, when we talk about bringing in the traffic safety bylaw, within or subsequent to the land use bylaw is the 0 lot lines. I know that's always a topic of choice, but when we do have the ADUs or the 0 lot lines, we are dealing with a smaller parcel of land. So let's not forget that Beaumont specifically is a highly populated young community. So we do have children and multiple families migrating to the front of their yards as well. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration. We're talking about increasing vehicles on the roads, and just let's be mindful that like Councillor Van Nieuwenkerk also mentioned, that the municipal enforcement aspect of it is something I think will greatly increase if we start doing that. So this is good conversation. I like the options, and yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more. So I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tesse, followed by Councilman Newkirk. Renee, you have the floor.
Thank you, man. Yeah, good conversation. Just wondering, so when do they figure out when we're meeting 35 dwelling units per hectare, right? Because sometimes the ADUs come after, and if we're above it, it's not like they're going to change the lot size to like a bigger one to accommodate you having more ADUs.
Thank you, Mayor, through to Councillor Tessier. So the 35 dwelling units is on a per net residential hectare where you've removed the roads and you've removed the commercial and all that stuff within the development, and then you're just left with the residential. We address that through the area structure plan, outline plan process to make sure that the density in the area is going to hit a certain target. And then we are monitoring that to see what that performance through as-built density is. So we are capturing it that way. Some neighborhoods might have come in higher than some of those targets, but overall we're trying to get closer to 35. And if we exceed that, that's okay. They won't go back and alter the density targets if everybody's meeting them. I don't think that's going to be, it's about the servicing and whatnot. So that actually just decreases our costs that we're paying because there's more people utilizing our servicing. It's actually better for us to have higher as-built density for some of those. So
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. That makes sense. So from what I understand, that once the ASP is depicted of the 35 residential units per hectare, and ADUs are just there to make it more affordable for people, but it does not have any bearing on the 35 units per hectare because it's done before they're putting the stages in.
Goes back to our as-built density. So when we report on that and the performance towards meeting those targets, previously Beaumont's target was actually we were 20 to 25. And then we increased to 35 in 2017 with the new growth plan being approved. So we're all still working towards increasing those density targets. Majority of our neighborhoods actually are still closer to a 20 to 25 dwelling unit, but our newer ones are all have to come in at the 35. So that's where you're seeing that performance, and we would be adjusting that. But I think Beaumont's current as-built density, last I saw, we were close to 20, I believe.
Okay, thank you for that data. Yeah, and just, you know, I'm not up here saying we need to get rid of ADUs. That's not the case at all. I think if you look at the data, you know, there's about 110 in our city that have one, and then there's about 10 that have two, right? So, you know, we're getting that diverse kind of housing types in a subdivision to meet these, whether zero lot lines are there or not, because other communities can do it. So I know we talk about affordability a lot, but you can buy a townhouse and put an ADU in that as well, right? You can buy a duplex, put an ADU in that as well. The worry sometimes is having no restrictions. If you live in an older area and you have a 12,000 square foot lot with a massive 2-story home, and your neighbor sells that same home, and now they can put in an unlimited amount of suites because it's in one of the integrated neighborhoods. You know, does that feel like Beaumont? Does that feel unique? I know we have to stay within it, but those mature neighborhoods don't have to meet those expectations or those current density markets, right? So I'm not up here saying get rid of them all. I'm just saying let's be realistic of what people want when they're living here.
Raymond, follow up from you.
Going to say that the majority of our neighborhoods do have density targets that do exist that would have been part of their outline plan. So even though you could say have an unlimited, depending on which district you might be in, you would still need to follow back to that outline plan. So it couldn't just be a free for all. And then they would still actually have to meet their maximum site coverage. And so most of those and the frontage standards, which actually preclude them from building a bazillion units on their house. So they wouldn't be able to actually physically fit that on their parcel, and therefore it wouldn't be permitted.
Okay, so why do we have it on there unlimited then?
Because the land use bylaw had gone from, say, 14 or 12 residential districts that we used to have down to 3. We have most of the new areas are primarily using the integrated neighborhood district. And then our older areas were utilizing the mature neighborhood district. And if we want to be able to build an apartment building, which we do have in some of these ones, or to be able to accommodate development within Centreville, which actually has a target of 100 dwelling units within there as an intensification. That is why that's in there, is to be able to permit us to build up in strategic areas where that would be permitted and the infrastructure would allow for it. Because that's another constraint too, is that the pipes probably aren't big enough. They're not designed to have that increased in capacity from that many units connecting to it. So there are limitations built in, even if it's not explicitly put into the land use bylaw. They do exist.
Yep. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Tessier, maybe go up on that point for a second, if I can add a question to that.
You give her.
In the vein you're going in. Ms. Raymond, if you could, or someone else in administration can explain to me, in the area structure plan, a developer develops a neighborhood. Area structure plan has, of course, single family dwellings, duplexes, fourplexes, and so on, and they meet the target of 35 net dwellings per hectare, right, as per the EMRB and our land use bylaw. So the developer sells these 50 lots to 3 different builders, and the builders then start to build single family homes. And then one builder decides to build a house that has 4 units inside. That wasn't part of the initial area structure plan. The builder bought the house, decided to put 4 suites in it and sell it as a single family home with 3 additional suites in it. What controls do we have to prevent that or to encourage that? Because, for example, that same home may have a double driveway in front, but they have 4 suites inside, each having 1 car. You can't possibly park the cars on the driveway. That's been kind of the issue with some of these ADUs that I think was unexpected consequence of the idea. So tell me the process where are the ADUs approved in the area structure plan before the lots are sold or after? My understanding is after there's less control, and that can cause the problems that some areas have been having in our city. Could you expand on that, please? Or Ms. Sharp, perhaps? Thank you.
Thank you. So you're correct. The additional dwelling units are not explicitly built into the density assumptions of the area structure plan. Where they really help us is for the as-built density, because as Ms. Raymond talked about, our as-builts aren't always meeting the targets that the area structure plan is outlining for us. So they help to supplement what's being built. In terms of what we have to limit, there is the additional requirements. So the setback requirements, the site coverage requirements, depending on the size of the unit, the parking requirements, all of that. However, if all of those extra requirements and constraints are met, the additional dwelling units are permitted use, which means that if they meet all of those constraints, then they are granted a development permit. The other thing I will just add is, so far, all of the additional dwelling unit applications that we received have self-regulated to align with the motion as presented. So talking about reducing to 2 dwelling units, if there's a detached garage, all of the ones with 2 dwelling units have an attached garage, and there's only about 10 additional dwelling units that are in a duplex product. All of the other ones are within a single family dwelling product. So independent of a potential amendment, the market is currently regulating to be in line with the motion as presented.
Thank you for allowing me to jump on that topic, Renee, with your questions. Please continue. Any question you may have?
No worries, Mayor. Just one sec here.
Thank you, Ms. Sharp.
So just a question, if I put a building permit in to build my house and I say, I'm going to put an ADU in. So I got a single family home, I'm going to put an ADU in the basement, but I don't actually develop it. Does that permit in the basement expire at that year end mark like the other permits do? Or can I just build it when I want down the road?
Ms. Sharp.
So the development permit would have a condition to have safety code or a building permit associated with the development permit. And if those conditions aren't met, or if the development doesn't take place, yes, it would expire within that year.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm good, Mayor. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councilman Newkirk. Steve, you're next in line. You have the floor, then followed by Councillor Barnhart.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just I got a few thoughts here, a few bullet points on this one. Topic that hasn't been brought up yet on the ADUs, just around some dollars and cents here. I'm hoping you could answer some questions around how are ADUs taxed, how are the utilities billed, and how are the metered services sorted out for gas, water, and power? Is there increased taxation because there are multiple people living in there? Is the garbage fees times 2, 3, and 4? Are there individual meters for gas, power, electricity? How is all that handled with the ADUs currently? Thank you.
Would that be? Ms. Darjay, musical microphones this evening. Let me get you on. You're good.
Thank you for that question. With respect to the utilities, that is up to the homeowner. If they're going to split that, that's on the private side. So the city doesn't get involved with that. With respect to the garbage cans, if they request additional garbage cans and organic bins, then they would pay that additional fee. But we don't issue that just because there is a new suite. And I apologize, what was the third one?
Taxes. Like
Oh,
the actual tax.
So the assessor would assess the building with any improvements. So taxation, the house would be taxed based on the improvements that are made to it. Correct. The assessor gets a copy of the permit, so they're able to make that assessment from that.
Okay, if I may, Councilman Newkirk, just a quick question as a follow-up to that. My understanding is that with the ADUs, if the home is purpose-built from the get-go with a single family with 3 additional units inside, hence the total of 4, do they not have to have separate meters for each unit within the dwelling itself? If there's 4 separate units, there should be 4 separate utilities being billed, is my understanding. I could be wrong on that, but my understanding is that there should be separate meters for the suites, or not. Maybe not supposed to be. I may be misinformed by a developer who asked that question to Ms. Sharp.
I'm just going to use my mic to communicate the head shake from Ms. Dargy. She's saying, no, it's not required.
It's not required. Okay. Okay, so Keisha here on the phone, a separate HVAC system, but not separate gas line meter, not a separate electricity meter. Interesting. Okay, I've been misinformed by somebody perhaps, or I misinterpret what they told me. Thank you. Councilman Newkirk, you still have the floor to your follow-up?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, thanks for that. And I was going to point out the separate HVAC piece, because that piece I did know and was aware of. I believe there's actually insurance requirements for that as well, or sorry, there are insurance requirements to be able to qualify as an ADU as well. Does that differ between insurance companies, insurance agents? Because I know when I owned a home in Fort McMurray that had a separate suite, at that time, there was a real run on secondary suites, and some were legal and some weren't. And the legal suites, the homes were worth more. The illegal suites, the homes were worth less. But we actually had to go through quite a process to prove that our suite was legal, and it had, at that time, they did ask for separate metering, and they asked for a separate HVAC system. And I'm just wondering, how do we, how do we deal with that? And I anticipate the answer going to be insurance is the homeowner's problem, right? But if we're giving permits out for these things, how do we ensure that they're adequately insurable and that we're setting people up for success as they look to ensure the things they're buying? Thank you.
Ms. Raymond.
Through the mayor to Councillor Van Nieuwkerk. Underneath the building code, you would be required to have that separate HVAC. So regardless of what jurisdiction you were in, if you were building a house in Alberta with a secondary suite, you are required to have that second HVAC separate system. So that would be that requirement. That would also all wouldn't change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
I am connecting a couple of dots here, but if a home had pulled a permit, home is built, and they go to sell it, but it's not even marketed as having those ADUs in it. And what if they didn't build walls or the separations internally that are required to meet what they were permitted to do? How is that reconciled currently?
Ms. Raymond?
Once again, lots of times that would be regulated through, they'd have to get a compliance letter typically when they go to sell. That might be that requirement. So we would note at that time, sometimes that there's unpermitted basement development or other things like that, that we would catch at that time and then require them to get a permit. Sometimes they may not actually be able to achieve those things, and then that suite would not be able to be permitted, and we'd have to discontinue it through the different mechanisms that Ms. Sharp has already outlined. That would be one way that we would catch some of those. And then some other ones are complaint-based, where we've had other people report illegal suites to us. And then we have contacted them and gone through that process, saying we're aware that you have an illegal suite, and then we work through them to try to get them to be in compliance with the building code and getting a development permit for that. So we do work with them, but unfortunately not all of them are able to be converted to a legal suite. But yeah.
So I guess in the instance where we give a permit that is allowed under the land use bylaw right now for a home to have 2, 3, or 4 suites in it, do we currently follow up to make sure that those 2, 3, or 4 suites were built as per the permit they requested?
Ms. Remy, leave your mic on for a while. We'll
Okay,
just
I'll leave
keep
my
it back
mic
and
on.
forth.
I keep turning it off, turning it off.
I'll
We're
keep
playing
it back on
telephone
again,
mic
so.
over here. Through the mayor to Councillor Van Newkirk. So they would have that development permit, which would have all the different things out there that they were going to be building as part of that permit. And then they would be required to get that building permit, as Ms. Sharp talked about. That building permit would talk about, okay, we're going to have all these different components that are going to be built within this house, right? Like this is the layout of the house. This is what the house is going to look like. This house has a suite here and a suite over here. They would actually go and they would do that through the inspection process for the building permit. So they're checking it at foundation, at framing, there'd be electrical permit inspections, gas inspections, all of that stuff to inspect those different components. But anything that was noted as being part of the permit we are going to check for to make sure that they were closed.
Someone applies for a 3-unit, 3 ADU dwelling, that our current process would ensure that all 3 units are built out in the home?
Correct.
Okay, and if that wasn't the case and a resident had a concern with thinking that that didn't occur, how would a resident bring that forward?
They could contact the planning department. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and you know, what I will say is I'm leading down this path because there is a home out there that was a 3 or 4 unit permit built. The home was subsequently put up for sale. In this for sale ad, they didn't even mention that there were additional suites. They didn't even market additional suites in the actual property. You know, it's a contentious property in Beaumont. So, you know, I bring that to the attention of everyone in the room and everyone watching at home. I find it hard to believe that you would go through all the rigmarole to get your 3 or 4 ADUs, you know, go through the hassle and then not even market it as having those things. You would think that you would want to do that to increase the saleability of the product. But anyways, little tangent there. Let me redirect, Mayor. Just sorry, I got my bullet points out of order here. Just one comment here that I should have added probably near the beginning is that, you know, when you hear that the developers are building for the market, are they building for Beaumont's market? Are they building for the regional market? Are they building in Beaumont what sold well in Edmonton? You know, those are the thoughts that go through my mind. And it's not lost on residents that, you know, for every couple of feet you squeak out of a lot, a developer gets an extra lot, right? Especially when they're so skinny. So, you know, tonight is the night to say that. It's not lost on residents that by taking a few feet from, you know, 10 or 12 lots that the developer will gain an extra on, right? So, you know, for all the people that have told me that, I spit that back out and I say, yeah, I can see it. I know how that works. I've seen it. I've seen the applications come back for, you know, we were going to build this, but now for these reasons, we want to change the picture and build this. And by the way, there's an extra lot at the end. I've seen that. So just want to acknowledge that for everyone that has brought those concerns to me. Switching gears a little bit, in the northwest portion of Beaumont, you know, we're still talking about additional dwelling units. And when I look at some of the more dense product that has been sold in the northwest portion of Beaumont, one of the things that I see is a struggle, maybe not now as everything's not all the way built out, but similar to what Councillor Tessier was saying, you know, the more we see of this, I think the more problem we're going to have. When I look at the setback of garages, even the garages are set so far back on some properties that you know, in order to get in and out of your garage, you're either going to have to do a 4-point turn or else you're going to have to plumb back up onto your neighbor's pad across the way and then take off. So, you know, we are setting ourselves up for situations where there's not even enough room for people to get in and out of garages because of that. And, you know, those areas, you know, where you're supposed to park is your garage because, you know, the garage is in the back. And so when you count the parking, you could fit a tricycle back there. So you're supposed to go in there and use both parking spots in the garage. Well, that's not going to happen because people also use garages for storage. And these lots are so skinny that in the front, when we start measuring 1.5 meters and 3 meters and, you know, all our measuring in the front, you know, because people are going to be parking in the front. It's just a cycle that I see. And you know, if the garages, you know, so I offer, you know, if the garages weren't set so far back on the property so that you could actually have a garage pad there for people to park on, that there's part of a solution. You know, just a 6 or 7 foot ramp up into the garage that doesn't fit vehicles is a way to get in and out of the garage. It's not a solution to parking problems. Because one of the other things that the fourth item on tonight's agenda is going to say is that you're not supposed to be able to park in alleys. And I can drive around Beaumont and I can see people paralleled, you know, mirrors in, paralleled to their garage doors, parking in alleys. So wait until we start getting those calls coming in, as you know, as we start to develop and grow. So and then just back to what the market is looking for, and those comments, and our products are selling well because Beaumont is growing. Beaumont has the house. They come for the community. They come for the amenities. They come for, you know, the complete community package that we're trying to build out here, that we're offering so well, that we're servicing well. So I know it's not just you're coming for your house. You're coming for a whole bunch of other reasons as well. But what I would say is that, you know, at a recent event in Beaumont, you know, over on the west side, there was a huge turnout for people coming to check out a new neighborhood, beautiful playgrounds, well done homes, some really quality homes from some quality builders out there. And being inquisitive, I asked around, what do you think? What do you think? What do you like? What do you not like? There wasn't very much what people didn't like. They loved the fact that the developer had built out the playgrounds first. They loved the fact that the first thing you saw when you come into the community was the parks, and you know, you go right and left into the neighborhood. Now they loved the fact that there was some free fries that day, right? You know, so, you know, there's a whole bunch of things to love about events like that. But the consistent thing that I heard is I would buy here, but. And the I would buy here, but crowd, I can't quantify how big that crowd is versus to the crowd that's going to buy the smaller, skinnier products, the skinnier houses, the skinnier lots. I can't quantify any of that. But what I can share is that there were more people that told me they were concerned with the small lots than there were that said, I can't wait to buy here. So, you know, that's the feedback I got that day. And when I wander around, I talk to people. That's just what I do. What I would say is that there are very many pieces to the additional dwelling unit conversation. I think Councillor McCook talked about affordability well. I think parking is the crux of the additional dwelling unit conversation. You know, we have some multiple suite properties that are over parked or over, you know, they have more stalls than they needed even after putting more suites in. But ironically, those are the same houses that I'm getting pictures texted to me of 4 and 5 people parked out in the cul-de-sac while there's 1 car on the garage or on the garage pad, right? Like this is what we're seeing, you know, perception versus reality, right? So I don't know what the parking study idea is going to tell us more than going to drive around Beaumont and see what people are dealing with, see what the problems are, and listening to the community and focusing solutions based upon what we hear. I think there's some aspects of planning theory that are really letting us down in Beaumont. And I mean that in the nicest way, because Beaumont is what it is for all the reasons that it got here. When we go from the crux of this whole thing is density and increased density. So I'll kind of stop my rambling here, Mayor, but one of the things that I want to explore in the near future is, you know, how do we start a regional conversation around this 35 units per net residential hectare? How is it working? Who is it working for? What do our neighbors to the south, Red Deer region, Calgary region, what stick are they measured to? What targets are they trying to achieve? Is it different than Beaumont? How is that working? And in a future meeting, I will put a notice of motion together to start exploring that a bit, but I just wanted to kind of wrap my head around a bunch of pieces there tonight around the additional dwelling units. So thanks for the time.
Thank you, Councillor. I do have a quick follow-up question for Ms. Raymond, perhaps, on the taxation part of the conversation. You mentioned the assessor would probably take a single-family dwelling that has 3 additional units of additional ADUs into it and would assess a higher amount of value to compensate for that. Can you give us any idea what that difference would be? Now, let me share where I'm going with this, give you a chance to think about the answer, okay? So I'm aware of a home that has 3 additional units in it for a total of 4. My understanding is that there are 3 families, actually 4 families living in the house. The owner has no kids, but the 3 units have kids. So normally those 4 families would be 4 separate houses with 4 separate property taxes and 4 separate school taxes. They're living in one house now. So the question is, how do we account? They have the advantages of the affordability, all the good things that they have the advantage of, but it's also fair to say perhaps they're not paying their fair share of property tax or school tax because those kids are going to school, either be public or state. What it would be for a single family dwelling to compensate the difference in number of kids going to school. It's a bit of a tough question. I get that, but that's one of the questions some residents have raised to some council regarding, okay, ADUs are great for many reasons, but if they've got 4 families in the house and they're all going to school, is that fair to the schools who are providing service, not getting the proper tax revenue from that particular property? If you could, Ms. Raymond, give some enlightenment to that question.
Sure, I'll try to answer a little bit of that question. I'm not going to be able to tell you what the increase is based on the type of additional dwelling unit that might be in there. I'm not sure what that calculation would be like. I can say, though, that one of the other, we do have a property tax requisition for schools, but schools also do head count and they do get paid through the provincial government based on the amount of children that are attending the school. So that still exists regardless of how many people are reported living there. You could have one family with 12 people still living there. If we wanted to say this is like old Beaumont, right? And big French family. That would still exist, right? So we're not regulating the users of the house, right? We need to move away from that. We need to regulate the use of the house, not be as concerned with who lives in there. Because that could be that could exist right now, even without all these additional dwelling units. And it most assuredly does. It's common in different types of demographics and backgrounds. And I think we will start to see that popping up more as Beaumont becomes more diverse, but it is captured through different ways. Like they might be paying more, even if we're not necessarily capturing it on that per capita basis there on the property tax. But that is one way that they are doing that. You know, they're still registering more vehicles. They're still having all those other different ways of paying for services.
It does help to some extent. I do appreciate that answer. There's more to it, and we'll get back to that shortly. Now, we were looking at doing a hard stop at 6:30 on this particular topic as we have consultants for further topics this evening. I'm going to go to 6:40 on this particular topic, and then we have more questions from Councillor Miller, Councillor Barnhart, and Councillor Newkirk. So we're going to stop at 6:40 and move this continued discussion to a later date to make sure we take our time and go through this prudently and with a proper pace, make sure we get all the questions answered. So with that, I'll go to Councillor Miller, then Councillor Barnhart. So I may stop somebody, hopefully not in midstream, but we'll go from there. Councillor Miller.
Considering I've already spoke once, I think Councillor Barnhart wanted to go first.
Oh, that's very nice of you. I appreciate that. Councillor Barnhart, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Councillor Miller, for allowing me to speak. I'll have to keep it short because first of all, my voice is going, but also the computer is unstable. So I'm probably not going to be able to see you for very long and it's going to keep glitching on me. But basically all good questions. My question is, what does this council want to do about that at this point in time? Because it seems to me we could go on for days asking these very good questions. But we've heard from the consultant and we've heard from the admin that essentially we're on track with our existing policies, with our existing blueprint. If we want to reopen that, that's a particular motion. But if we have specific amendments, It would probably do us well to figure out what they are, because I'm having a really difficult time, and I think others are as well, following down a particular path for each one of these items. It depends in my mind on where we are in the different areas of our city. When in a greenfield is one thing, infill is another. Parking, when you have teenagers in your home, you have more than one parking stall per family for sure, per dwelling unit. So there's just a lot of ins and out on this, and I appreciate that the administration has already done quite a bit of work on it. And we're asking really good questions. They're all very good questions. But I am wondering, given the report that we have, where are we going with this? Are we thinking of reopening the land use bylaw, or are we amending it? Or, as I heard the consultant say, are we looking at tools that we can use to enforce it better, or to tweak it in different areas, or to come up with different bylaw options to deal with it? It's just really difficult to deal with this huge, massive bylaw with all of these questions and not have a clear direction about where this report is going or what motions might be coming next. I, for one, think we've put a lot of energy and time and money into getting it to this point. I'd hate to see that all thrown out. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I also appreciate that there's a lot of education that has to go into learning how this all puts together. That's where the consultant and the administration have given us their best thoughts on this one. So I just want to say that at this point in time that I do need us to put some structure on this. So where are we going next? Where do we want to go with this? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think anybody I'm aware from council wants to toss the entire land use out, and your concern is noted. I think there might be a couple of tweaks coming down the way possibly, but I do think the bulk of the land use bylaw that we redid a few years ago has been very, very successful. There's been a couple of tweaks may need to be made, but that's for council to decide going forward with the help of administration and this presentation. So with that, I'll give Steve a crack at talking, and then we're going to, my mistake, Councillor Miller, you were first. Sorry, Steve, you're out.
I must have.
You know what I mean? You're next, but we'll see. Councillor Miller.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Barnhart, for those comments. I have to echo that. Sitting here, I really like all the conversation, but we as a council really need to decide where are we moving with this. Getting all this clarification is one thing, what's wonderful, but yeah, we've got some decisions to make. I just had one question about the demographics that are in the ADUs. If we have any data on ages of families or any of that. And the reason I ask is because we do mention, like Councillor McCook mentioned, the senior population, and where do you live when you're retired, or if you want to stay in close proximity to grandparents, etc. I just want to know if we have data on that, and that would really help me with decisions for the seniors in the future and where they would live.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to Councillor Miller. Some of this would be information is available within our age-friendly strategy, and we can pull that out for you. It's also within the federal government's census, where they release all the housing statistics, but we can pull some of that information together.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's nice to have eyes on it to see, are we fitting the growth for everybody in the community? So thank you.
Okay, we're almost at 6:40. Steve, are you okay to maybe continue your question in the next session on this? One quick one. Okay, Steve, go right ahead, please. Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah, thank you. And I missed kind of a sub bullet point here in my notes around just a comment around, the market is building what they're looking for. One of the things that I see when the diagrams pop up for, future neighborhood build outs is a feeding frenzy for the 3 or 4 bigger lots that you can build a bigger house on. So, I would challenge a developer, go make a community of bigger lots. Because it'll sell in Beaumont. When you have more demand than you have supply for things, we know what that does with the opportunity for pricing. So the carrot is there. Go make the same dollars off fewer lots and charge more. I'm certain they will fill in Beaumont. When you have 3 corner lots that allow you to build, a house of substantive size in a neighborhood, and you have 10 families wanting to buy that, or groups of 3 families trying to go together to make sure that they can buy that to build side by side, I know what that tells me as a consumer. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Raymond?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to make a note about the housing sizes. We keep calling them small. They're about 2,000 square feet with about 500 square feet in the garage. They're not small houses. What they're doing is they're maximizing their parcel, and they are decreasing the amount of lot they're purchasing, but it's not necessarily to actually have a smaller house. So that is where the market is kind of going. There is one whole development that's actually going to be entirely, they want to do entirely zero lot line, including the estate home, because people will buy for the house, but they're not actually spending the money on the lot. So that is where people are going in the market right now.
Just 1 second, sorry. I got a note there. Okay, we're at 6:40. As we said, great conversation. It's not lost on me or council that, as Councilor Barnard mentioned initially, we need to sort of encapsulate where we want to go with this. I want to congratulate council and administration for a job well done so far on the land use bylaw, and the majority of it is very good. We need to sort of figure out the next steps, and I want to make sure we have a chance to digest this evening's information and come back council at our next meeting when we have this topic brought back with an idea where each of us thinks we need to go. And maybe we'll start that meeting with how we want to see this going forward. ADU seem to be kind of one of the 2 issues, how we need to go forward, but we can discuss that at a later time. So is there a member of council willing to make a motion to move the discussion of land use bylaw to, we have a couple of choices. We could go to an additional committee of the whole on December 20th and then wrap it up there, or move it to January. I would personally prefer December 20th. Well, it's relatively close to our mind thoughts here. So Councilor Tessier, would you be willing to get us started on that?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. Can we move it to that committee of the whole, but also do another motion saying we're going to bring it to the January 10th one to make decisions, so that we have a chance to ask questions and then bring it forward to an actual council meeting where we can bring our motions forward?
That's my understanding. But Ms. Bouget, can you give us some guidance and administration on that, please?
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Tessier. So there are a few options. The committee of the whole could refer this report and discussion to a specific council meeting. So that could be January 10th, and continue the conversation, and then you would be able to pass any related motions. If the alternative would be that the committee would like to have this conversation continue at a subsequent committee of the whole, then there are 2 choices. The next one would be January 17th, or we could add an additional committee of the whole for December 20th. In the case where we add an additional committee of the whole for September 20th, the matter could still be moved then to a council meeting as required by recommendation from the committee. So anything is possible, but we wouldn't do in one motion to say, we're going to take it to committee of the whole, then to council. We would just take it step by step, but all those options are on the table. So the best way to move this forward is just to have some direction from the committee, or for someone to put a motion to either postpone to December 20th and call an additional committee of the whole, or to postpone to January 17th committee of the whole, or to move the conversation by referral to a future council meeting.
So to answer your question, Councilor Tessier, we could do December 20th, if that's your motion, and then at that meeting, move it to a council meeting. And as Councilor Barnard said, with a motion to move forward to the council meeting with some specific direction at that time. December 20th gives us one more time to kind of hash it out
and start firing motions in that way. But if everyone else needs more time to ask questions, I'm good either way.
Okay, that doesn't help me exactly, but I'm okay. I know you, that's okay.
So Mr. Mayor, what I hear Councillor Tessier saying is that you would like to do a referral motion so that this gets referred to the January 10th, 2023 council meeting.
Yeah, and just to clarify, like, you know, I hear what Councillor Barnhart's saying, and I feel like we've talked about this for so long, and the motions are going to come forward along with the questions. So I don't know if it's worthwhile if we do it twice anyway. That's just my own opinion. Like, are we going to ask enough questions to be able to just make those decisions almost a month later and maybe forget it? Where if we just move it to January 10th, keep reading the report, ask a few questions once we start putting those motions forward of what we want to change.
Okay, the advantage of going December 20th with another committee of the whole is to allow all council members to make sure the questions are all been answered. We can tear it apart, make sure we know where we want to go. Or if a member of council wants to make a motion, Sam, we go right from here to a council meeting, make the motion and see where council's feeling. But I'm not sure everyone had a chance to speak this evening. I now see Councillor Barnhart and Councillor Muckhoff-Swain. So I'll go to Sam first, Kathy, if you don't mind, and get a quick comment before we go to any kind of motions here. So Sam, would you proceed, please?
Yeah, thanks. Good discussion. You know, just recognizing that council meetings are really decision-making. But what I've heard tonight is a whole bunch of questions, a whole bunch of concerns, not many solutions. Exactly. Kathy summed it up perfectly. I think if we go straight to the January 10th meeting, that'll be incredibly challenging for the mayor to follow, and no one's going to have the background. So I think there's a lot more that we could spend on the 20th of December trying to figure out how we can do that. What areas do we want to address, and then use the expertise with Sandy and her team to help us kind of craft motions and be ready to come to that meeting. I just feel, you know, if we go from this straight to a council meeting where we're supposed to be there to really make decisions, I think it will be incredibly challenging. So my thoughts would be, let's have a focused conversation on the 20th and allow folks to get the rest of their questions answered, but then really dive in and talk about how we can make the necessary changes that we want, as opposed to just making motions on a fly. So that would be my thoughts. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Sam. And one thing too, about the committee of the whole, we get a chance to talk, roll over our sleeves and talk more about it, whereas council meetings are much more formal, less chance for discussion and debate. So I'm leaning toward the 20th myself, but I'll go to Councillor Barnhart, followed by Councillor Van Newkirk. Kathy?
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thanks, everyone. My question is actually about process, and I wonder if it's a quick enough question that Ms. Raymond could give an answer. If we make a motion to make an amendment to an existing land use bylaw section, do we have to open up the entire bylaw for review again? Or can we just look at making amendments for, say, parking, ADUs, and home-based businesses, if those are the three? Ms. Raymond?
Ms. Raymond?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, through to Councillor Barnhart. If we were to make alterations to one aspect of the bylaw, there could be unintended consequences on other aspects of the land use bylaw, but also we may no longer be in alignment with other master plans, such as the age-friendly strategy, the affordable housing strategy, or potentially even the MDP. So there are broader concerns that we haven't addressed through this because we didn't get into the specifics, not knowing where council wished to go with this information. So, you know, even if you did decide what issues you wanted to look at, we would need to do further work to explore what those ramifications of those issues are, because it might not just be one section. And then, of course, this is a planning bylaw. Anything would require like public engagement, further public engagement to be done. It would have a public hearing, and then we would have that bylaw amendment process that would go along with that. And if we were to amend the MDP, we would need to put through a ref application through to the board to have the MDP amended prior to the LUB being done. So just a few things in terms of that process.
Thank you, Ms. Raymond. Ms. Mujia, do you wish to speak as well?
No, I'm just keeping my mic on, so I'm at the ready.
It's just easier. Okay. Are you good, Kathy? Does that give you an answer?
Well, Mayor, I just want to know if it's possible, regardless of what date we pick to come back to have the discussion further, could the administration give us that information in writing as to, you know, what making these amendments actually means in terms of process and timing? Because it's not as easy as making an amendment and therefore then we will carry it through. As Ms. Raymond has said, this has major not complications, I don't want to say it that way, but implications for the developers, for ongoing development in our community. And I'm just concerned about that in terms of opening up a huge can of worms without knowing what we're opening up. So I would just like that information to be included. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, this may be premature, but I always try to anticipate where we might go. So there were a number of recommendations as next steps in the report. So something that Committee of the Whole could do would be to make the following recommendation to council. And it would be to basically by the end of April of 2023, include a proposal for a residential parking study to be considered as part of the 2023 spring budget adjustment process, to prepare a report on potential land use bylaw amendments to address the concerns raised by the 2022 land use engagement process, i.e. the process we've just undergone, and to provide a report with recommendations on ensuring that parking regulations and enforcement practices reflect community priorities regarding parking and noise control.
Right.
So that would be a more wholesome report that administration could endeavor to work on. But I'm not sure if the committee would rather have more conversation at a Committee of the Whole meeting before we give that kind of prescriptive direction to admin.
So this could be done on the 20th.
Absolutely.
This, what you're seeing right now. But
Absolutely.
based on Kathy's comments and potential of other implications, I think we need to furthermore meet on the discussion one more time with Committee of the Whole, be prudent, take our time, get it right, figure out what we want to do, and see how those might cause implications that we hadn't thought of yet. So I'm leaning much more towards December 20th. It may be a very short meeting. I don't know. It could be a QR meeting. I don't know. It'll be one topic. It'll be this, and we'll put some more discussion on it. So Councilor Newkirk, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And that's kind of where I was going to go to, is to vote for the December 20th meeting. Like, one of the things that might be helpful is, you know, if councilors said, hey, I'm bringing a motion forward that is kind of looking towards this, you know, I want to do this, and I would want to do that, and I would want to do that, because at a council meeting, if you put a motion forward, I'm going to ask the same questions of that, you know, around that, surrounding that motion, that I would ask on the 20th as well, right? So, you know, so what I would say is that the good use of time on the 20th could make the next council meeting more efficient, and I'll also allow administration to have some time to consider some of the repercussions of the, you know, the ways that things are trending with council's views and thoughts. So,
okay. Seeing no one else wishing to speak, I'm kind of reading the room at the 20th of December, maybe where we're heading. Somebody needs to make a motion on that. Councilor Newkirk, would you care to make that motion? It's on the screen. Oh, Steve, there, your mic's back on. A postponement motion, please.
yep. I'd be pleased to make the motion that the November 15th, 2022 land use bylaw hour zoning blueprint report be postponed to the next Committee of the Whole meeting, and that an additional Committee of the Whole meeting be held on December 20th, 2022 with a start time of 5 p.m. and that administration provide the required notice of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I can't see our councilors on the screen if they have their hand up. I'm assuming they don't. For any questions, discussion on the motion. So with that, I will ask for the vote. Ms. Bujaya, we do that, the votes right? Voting this. Council, would you please vote on the motion? Councilor Varner, how do you vote?
In favor, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor McCook?
In favor.
Councilor Muckoff Swain? Sam?
In favor.
You might have microphone problems. Oh,
Just waiting for my call. There we go.
your favor. Thank you very much. And that carries, we're going to have an additional unscheduled, we have the whole meeting on the 20th to continue with this discussion. Land use bylaw. I want to thank administration and council, the public ahead of time. It's an additional meeting, but we want to get this right and take our time, have a proper discussion, and make sure we come out of that with some ideas how to proceed going forward. So I appreciate that. And we do have a break scheduled for 7 o'clock. So I'm going to break us right now till 7:15, and we'll come back and we'll begin with section 5B, 5C, and 5D. So if you got them, smoke them, as the saying goes. We got a break coming. So see you in about, we'll see you promptly at 7:15. Thank you. Oh, Ms. Bujaya, pardon me.
I know that my colleague went to pick up the refreshments for council and she is not returned yet. I'm not sure if council wants to start the next item and maybe take a break in 10 minutes so we could get through the presentation on the next item. I'm just being mindful of council's time.
Sure.
And I know probably people need a break, but if we could push on maybe just for another 10 minutes,
Okay.
it would just allow the dinner to arrive and for it
Perfect.
to be
So,
set up.
okay, we're going to roll then. Thank you, Ms. Bujaya. We're going to roll on with 5B, Recreational's Facility Allocation Policy, Consultant Report and Proposed Draft Policy. We'll begin with that and we will probably break around 7:05, 7:08, somewhere in there. Okay. Well, that sure cleared the room. Wow. All right.
Quick 10 minutes. Here we go.
Remember, Amanda had the close mic close to you so we can hear you nice and clearly. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Welcome back, Ms. Cuthbert. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, committee. I am Amanda Cuthbert, Manager of Recreation, and this evening I have information on the review of the Recreation Facility Allocation Policy. This allocation policy was approved in 2020. This policy is up for review in February 2023. Administration is aiming to have a policy updated and in place by December 1st, 2022 to start the 2023 spring and summer allocation. Administration had hired a consultant group to collect user groups' feedback of the 75 total community volunteer organizations, which included sports, leisure, community groups, schools, and churches. 19 surveys were submitted and meetings were held with 6 of the outdoor user groups. Survey results can be found in attachment 2, engagement finding report. Most of the city's user groups offer youth programming, with a minority offering programming for adults. Most of the user groups expect additional growth to their organizations in the future. The majority, 14 out of 18, communicated that they have sufficient access to recreation facilities, and 13 out of 18 are moderately satisfied with the current policy. Understanding that most groups were satisfied with the current policy, we made some changes to enhance the policy using the group's feedback. This include a higher priority for historical bookings, registration numbers moved to a lower priority, creating an in-season and off-season priority, and to enhance the transparency, ease to understand, and communicate effectively. As a result, wording in the policy statement has been changed to be more inclusive and to highlight the city is providing access to the recreation facilities for all residents and groups. Definitions were added to make the policy more transparent. The process has been adjusted to explain how the policy will be facilitated, administration's timelines, and users' responsibilities. Priorities have changed to account for the historical bookings, in-season and off-season activities. Spontaneous use and adult use was also added. The Recreation, Parks and Culture Advisory Committee had an opportunity to review the consultant's report along with the draft policy. The committee provided minimal wording changes and is supportive of administration's updates to the policy. The user groups that participated in the survey were provided the draft policy and the consultant's report for review and provided the following feedback. One group requested to move the timeline back a month for the sports fields allocation to be concluded before the end of January, not February. Administration is recommending keeping the timelines the same, but will work with this group to have specific outdoor amenity allocated by the end of January. Administration believes that these changes presented in the policy will provide the most access to recreation facilities for all residents. And it is in line with the guiding principles from the Recreation, Parks and Facility Master Plan. This policy is scheduled to be brought to council for consideration at the November 22nd, 2022 meeting. The last thing I did was to mention the fee structure for the Fields and Diamonds. That comment did come up in the user's feedback and was in the consultant's report. Administration has begun researching fee structures for the Fields and Diamonds to find some options that may align with our indoor fee structure. We will continue to work on that into the new year. And any recommendations we have. And now I'm done and I'm happy to answer questions.
That was quick. That's very much appreciated. Thank you, Amanda. With that, I'll begin questions from council. We have about 8 minutes, so we'll go as fast as we can, or as far as we can, pardon me. So Councillor Miller, you have the floor, Ashley.
Yeah, I'll just keep it brief. Can you clarify and confirm the groups that participated in the survey. I just want to be 100% sure that I am reading this correctly.
Through your worship to Councillor Miller.
Oh, sorry, page 161, I believe is where I'm seeing it. Well, it is on 161, but it's all
Is
maybe
it an attachment and report?
it's in, oh, sorry, of the agenda,
Okay.
page 10 of the report.
Page 10. So that's. Sorry, I'm.
Through your worship to Councillor
Yep.
Miller, is that Appendix B, the group survey respondents in the consultant's findings?
Yes.
Thank you.
Perfect, and yes, I can confirm this was the consultant's report, and yes, these were the groups that they did contact, and these are the groups that responded through the survey.
Okay, so there was 6 of them, to be clear.
6?
Okay, maybe I'm reading it incorrectly here. I'm
Sorry.
looking at group meetings where it says the discussions were convened between September 21st and 26th.
Yeah, it says Lady Cartel, River City Softball, Beaumont Soccer, Beaumont Minor Ball,
Minor
Football,
and
adult
adult
slow
slow
pitch.
pitch.
There's just 6 there. 9. Appendix B. Okay.
Okay, so
There it is.
all right, I guess I'm confused with what I was reading on who participated. Let me go read that again.
Can you clarify that, Ms. Cuthbert?
Sure, I'll try to clarify that through your worship to Councillor Miller. The consultants received 19 surveys back from
Okay.
different user groups. Within those 19 surveys, I believe some or most of the 6 of the outdoor user groups that they also had a meeting with could have been in that 19 as well.
Okay.
Does that answer your
I
question?
think so. I was just, I was looking for, I just wanted to make sure, because when I look at the 6, there's essentially 2 recreation sports that are being tackled there. So I just wanted to make sure the other groups weren't essentially being left out, or I wanted to clarify that they in fact did respond. So on 169, it looks like they were part of the response. I just don't see where there's more, where it elaborates more on what they were on their actual responses. But as long as I know that they were reached out to and did have the opportunity, that's.
Yes, correct. So on page 169, the group survey respondents, those were everybody that provided a survey in writing. And those survey results are in the findings. You can see it. It doesn't give you very specific detail on who said what, but the group responses are in there. Then there was a separate meetings with just the outdoor user group. So those that were listed, the outdoor groups, they had separate meetings. All the indoor groups did not have meetings. What we found is there was a lot of more challenges with the outdoor groups than the indoor. So that's why we gave them a little extra support and opportunity with the consultant.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. That's my question.
Just the one?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ashley. Councillor Van Newkirk. We'll give you a go here and then we'll see how far we get with our discussion before we need to take our break.
Yeah, thank you. What I can't recall is the specific concerns that user groups have brought forward. So if I think of a presentation from Slow Pitch, they brought concerns with the policy in the past. I can't recall what those specific concerns were, but in the new iteration of the policy, what concerns that Slow Pitch would have brought forward have been addressed or changed, or maybe you can think of a better example of a user group feedback that resulted in some a tweak in the policy, because I know where was that, limits access to smaller groups, adults and new entrants. Yeah, so just at a high level, how did we make some tweaks to make that better for some groups? What would be a couple of the key things?
Yes, of course, through your worship to Councillor Van Newkirk. Some of the challenges that we saw and that we heard from the user groups and what came out in the survey, One was some equitable use. We did in our current policy, we did a really good job of making sure that locals had first opportunity to use our facilities. However, where we missed the mark was the challenge that we're going to have between the two local groups. So when we have an adult group and a youth group, say they're both local adult group, a local youth group. What happens is the youth group with the highest population would pretty much get all the space. And so what our current policy does is it leaves it open to some of those higher population groups really have the opportunity to take and railroad and pretty much take all the space they want. So the changes that we've made where we have secured 5% of spontaneous use for like free play, open time, drop-in space. We've secured up to 10% for prime times for adults. So that could be for slow pitch, that could be for an adult hockey group, that could be for an adult soccer group in the field house. So we have been able to secure some of those things. That is probably one of the major ones I would say where we had our biggest challenge, and that's how we have mitigated that one.
Yeah, and I think that's entirely helpful, right? Because there's a whole bunch of words here. The policy's small; it says a lot, but it's small but mighty. But the tweaks that were made are a result of the direct feedback that everyone gave, right? And so you're still not going to please everyone all the time, but the reason I ask that is people and groups bring feedback in, they give feedback, they take the time to do surveys, they take the time to sit down and have conversations, and some of those little tweaks there, hopefully we can see some improvements. And if we've missed the mark on something, just folks just need to continue telling us, and we can try again to tweak things, I would say. So yeah, thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thanks, Steve. Councillor Barnhart, Kathy, your hand's up. That's the last question we'll take before we go to our break. Kathy.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Cuthbert, for the work you did was so quick. I'm so glad to see it done by the end of the year. My one question that I have is around the residency requirement, and I'm wondering how you deal with the fact that we have a joint use agreement with the county, and that they as well are contributing some costs to some funding to work with us together on the fields and recreation. And I see that you have registration, not registration, I'm looking at the guidelines, including residency percentage of their members. So just explain that to me, because I am confused about how that fits here.
Through your worship, to Councillor Barnhart. Of course. So we do have under one of our definitions, we do have local refers to user groups or groups with 70% or more of their membership comprised of Beaumont residents or are within the Leduc County catchment area. So there is a specific catchment area that Leduc County determines. If people in that catchment area, then they would be considered local. Something else probably to note is a lot of our user groups, their zone that they play in is typically determined by their provincial association. So usually it is an area, it's not just one city. So I would probably say for something like minor baseball, they would have a fairly large zone where if you lived in that zone, then you would be a resident of Beaumont and you would play with Beaumont minor baseball. So all of those people that live within that provincial zone would be considered local. So I think they're all taken care of and protected under that. So for some of those other groups that are maybe not so sport centric, we would have some opportunity there, including the Leduc County residents in there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cuthbert. I understand it much better now. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Councillor, so having seen that, we have no further questions right now. So we'll take our break and we will reconvene at 7:25. So let's try and be prompt if we could. Please, we have a lot more to go through this evening. We'll finish up with Ms. Cuthbert right there. Ms. Bujaya?
Did you want to do the recommendation to receive for information at this time before we break? Just if there aren't any further questions?
We could. I didn't think of that, actually. It makes too much sense. Okay, so having said that, seeing no further questions from anybody on council, nobody on the screen in front of me, in addition to questions. So with that, Councillor Tessier, do you wish to make that recommendation?
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that the November 15th, 2022 recreational facility allocation policy consultant report and proposed draft policy be received for information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll ask council to vote. Councillor Barnhart, how do you vote?
In favor?
Councillor Monkoff Swain,
In favor.
Councillor McCook.
In favor?
Thank you. It carries unanimously, council. Thank you, Ms. Cuthbert. Appreciate that. Thank you for coming this evening. And with that, we will now go to break to 7:25 and coming back with 5C. Thank you.